Hello people, how's it going? Scotty. I had a debate a while ago and it was mostly to do with the environment and it's people's perception of capitalism. They have this view that, the evil, greedy capitalists will use up the world's resources, and therefore the argument in their case is that we need the government there to protect us from the evil capitalists.
I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own.
So the problem with the argument is the very fact that people don't understand that with regards to businesses, and anybody will agree with you upon this, the goal of any private business or private landowner is to make profits. Anybody will agree with you upon that, and they'll probably say, yeah, that's exactly the reason why, they'll probably use up all the natural resources and all the rest of it. I don't specifically know what they would exactly say, but I've came across a number of people who have that type of view. Now, the reason why that becomes such a problem is because in order to maximize your profits, you're going to have to minimize your costs, and people don't understand that. A prime example of such a successful business owner was John Davison Rockefeller, as I have mentioned before. He did not become successful and he didn't dominate the market because of the railroad industry of the 1870s. In fact, he entered the market in 1863, and by the late 1860s, he dominated the market. How did he dominate the market? He didn't use predatory pricing. It was just a fact that John Davison Rockefeller was more efficient than his other competitors. He was more efficient with his business. So it's the same with any private business owner, private landowner. They have the incentive to maximize their profits by minimizing their costs. And what that means is, minimizing your costs means using fewer resources. You're not going to use more resources because more resources are going to cost you more. So it's all about economic efficiency. It's all about using the fewest resources as possible to maximize your profits. And the other reason why the argument is deeply flawed is for this reason, that private landowners have the incentive to better the lot of their land. Why? Well, your land can either appreciate in value or it can depreciate in value. We hear this argument that, the greedy capitalists will cut down all the trees and they'll exploit the land, and all those resources would be destroyed, and this is why we need government to own the land and all the rest of this stuff. What people don't realise is that if a private landowner was to do as such by destroying much of the resources of his own land, if he was to do that, his land would depreciate in value. Therefore, later in the future, if he wanted to sell his land, it's a bit like if someone owns their property of their house. They have the incentive to look after their house, to look after their property. Because, if they were to move, if they were to sell their property, they want to ensure that their house is going to keep its value, or even to make profit from when they go to sell the house or whatever. Well, it's the same thing with private land. They have the incentive to essentially look after their private lot, because if they were to in the future to sell the land would have appreciated in value, therefore they're going to make a profit. Private landowners do not hold the incentive to, depreciate the value of their land, because it's not going to benefit themselves. There's no benefit from depreciating the value of your land. So, I hope something as simple and basic as that can help you understand that it's not as simple as people saying to you that capitalists would just exploit the land, use up all the natural resources, simply because two things. First of all, if businesses want to maximise their profits, they're going to have to, minimise their costs, which means using fewer resources. And secondly, your land can either appreciate or depreciate in value. And it's just irrational to think that a private landowner would have some sort of incentive to depreciate the value of their land. So basically, a private landowner is really, if they're going to cut down trees, they're going to regrow the trees because it'll help the value of their own lot. So it's not as simple as saying, well, the private landowners are going to use up all the natural resources and things like that. But it's quite interesting because on the other side of the argument, you could look at government and what governments have done. And they talk about how we need government to protect us. And you always hear the sort of arguments about BP and the oil spill, but they're so quick to forget the Mexican state-owned oil company that basically caused a massive spillage of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. The difference was between BP and, of course, the company that was state-owned was the very fact that the government did not pay for its damages, but BP did. That's the difference. In other words, the private sector took accountability for its own actions, its own responsibility. The government never, because it holds a monopoly over it. Other examples, like I've mentioned before in the past, we've seen government destruction of such land. Just look at the Aral Sea, the fourth largest lake in the world at one point. In the 1920s, the Soviet Union centralised agriculture, and by 1960 it was devastated. The land was contaminated. The fishing industry between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan was completely devastated. And that's a prime example of government causing destruction to the land. And you hear the arguments about the Amazon forest. I mean, there was the United States, I don't know if it was President Obama, but he was seeking to buy over the Amazon. It's one of these things that if it's left in the hands of government would easily just soak it all up. It would waste the resources. And it's that argument where you hear that we need government to protect us from all of this. And they don't realise, from what I've just explained, the private sector, it's not just as simple as just saying, well, here's the private sector, here's capitalists, they're going to use up all our natural resources and we'll be left with nothing. So anyway, people, I hope you've enjoyed the video and I shall talk to you later. Thank you for watching. Cheers.